Wow, that was tight, because the last one was 9 minutes and 59 seconds. I just squeaked it in there. Alright, so this is now clip number 4. That's what I think I'm calling it, yep. Number 7 is bifurcation, or black and white fallacy. Again, this is basically when you present a situation as having only 2 alternatives, where in fact other alternatives exist, or can exist. The classic example of this would be, let's say you ask a question on a marketing research question that says, do you intend to buy a car in the next 6 months? Yes or no? Or that's something by bifurcation, the 2 choices, the 2 extreme choices, yes or no. The problem, of course, is that there could be a third alternative, which would be the person is not sure. They're unsure. Right, so that's the problem. That would be the third alternative that hasn't been offered to the respondent. Another example, of course, would be like if you think about the Cold War. You had sort of the United States supposedly representing, capitalism. You have, those Russians, the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the communists, and this is like the 2 worlds. But of course, the reality is that you can have all these different alternatives. You can have a socialist system. You can have sort of a mixed economy that has some elements of capitalism, some elements of socialism. You could have quite a bit of elements moving towards capitalism with a few government-owned things. So you don't have to have just these 2 extremes of capitalism and communism. There can be all these other alternatives as economic systems as well. Right, so you don't have to see the world as being divided into 2 poles, and that's basically what this bifurcation is. It's only giving you 2 extremes. You can either have, gung-ho capitalism or, gung-ho communism, and it sort of ignores the alternative worlds that could also possibly exist as well. Okay, so this is basically what it's doing is creating a false dilemma where you can only pick between 2 things. Number 8. The non sequitur. Okay, the non sequitur. Where do I have it defined for you? I've got like 12 pages of notes here. You have to forgive me to try to. Oh, here it is. A non sequitur is an argument where the conclusion is drawn from premises which are not logically connected with it. Or a statement that does not follow logically from what preceded it. So here's an example. We have been discussing plumbing. So her remarks about astrology was a real non sequitur. In other words, she threw us a curveball from left field. We're starting with one thing, and then it's like, where did this conclusion about astrology come from? It does not follow. That's what non sequitur means. It does not follow in logic. Okay. Another example of this I found on the internet was the statement, a strong national defense is essential to our freedom. So that's the first part of the argument, the premise. Now we're going to show you the conclusion from it. Doesn't follow. So therefore we should fund production of missile MX system. Well, okay, so if you take the first premise, saying that national defense is important, it could, the conclusion might be maybe we should have more diplomacy. Right? Make agreements with other countries so they don't come and invade us. Have commercial links. Or maybe we should, it doesn't even necessarily mean we have to buy missile system MX. Maybe we could buy missile system, RRT or something. Right? So that statement doesn't follow in logic. Okay, so that basically covers non sequitur. 9. 9 is the red herring. Okay, the red herring is defined as a fallacy, and you commit this when you introduce irrelevant material, irrelevant to the issue being discussed, so that everyone's attention is diverted away from the points being made towards a completely different conclusion. In other words, I'm talking about, let's say inflation rates, and then you bring up some completely irrelevant thing to talk about, sports or something. That's because when I'm trying to talk about inflation, that's the debate we're having, and you bring up something that's completely unrelated to it. Okay? right? So what's another example of a, let me see, it's basically a diversionary tactic. It goes off topic, bringing in irrelevant stuff. Right. Another sort of version of this is when, to defend yourself from a criticism, you turn around and attack the attacker by accusing them of doing the same thing. So it's like saying, I accuse you of doing something, and then you turn around and accuse me of doing the same thing back. Well, it's irrelevant, because even if I did, or even if I had done it, it doesn't, you never really address the question of whether you had done it in the first place, right? So it's a fallacy in that sense. Okay, so that would be that one. 10. So let me squeeze this all in here. 10 is called Reductio ad Absurdum. Okay, so this is basically when you make a claim, you assume something is true, just for argument's sake, then go on to show that it leads to some sort of illogical conclusion, some illogical outcome, and therefore the original claim must have been absurd, and we should reject it, is basically the idea. They use this a lot in mathematics. Okay, 11 is called special pleading. Fetzer uses this in his book a lot. It's when you consider evidence only favorable to your own preconceived point of view, and you ignore all the rest. You can see how politicians could do this. I'm wonderful, I save the world, I do all these great things, and they sort of don't talk about all the times they lied to you, cheated, slept with, 12 other people that they weren't married to or something. Well, that could be an ad hominem argument, actually. That would actually be an ad hominem argument, because you're attacking the person. It's probably irrelevant. Anyway, and then finally, the Audiatur et altera pars, meaning state all your assumptions, make them explicit. In other words, the reason why you should make things explicit is, well, in a marketing research context, is because by making it explicit, people might be more likely to select that alternative. So, for instance, let's say you say something like, do you like to fly when traveling short distances? Or you could word it as, do you like to fly when traveling short distances? Or would you rather drive? You see, the first one, the option, the alternative of driving the car short distances as opposed to flying, was never stated explicitly. It was implicitly implied, but never stated explicitly. In the second question, it was explicitly stated. The second one is probably a better question because you've brought it out. The problem with the first one is that by not saying it, people might just go along with it because you never gave them the option. And so, there might be a bias in the question response in favor of flying. Okay? So, in other words, by giving them the option in question 2 of flying or cars, they'll be more likely to pick cars, and so the percentages won't be as skewed. Another example of this would be implicit assumptions in consequences. So, for instance, you could ask in your research question, are you in favor of a balanced budget? Or you could ask, are you in favor of a balanced budget if it would lead to increases in taxes? The second one, which brings out the sort of conclusion, is probably a better question. The reason is because the first one doesn't actually state what possible consequences could happen. And so people might therefore be more likely to say, yeah, I'm in favor of a balanced budget. But if you tell them, oh, this is going to lead to higher taxes and all the other problems, then they might not be as likely to be they're not as likely to be in favor of it when they know about all the consequences that might logically come from it. So that's why you should, so in other words, to avoid this bias towards the first one, you should state all the information explicitly. Time's up.